Hello and a very warm welcome to my autumn garden. If you're new to my channel, then you won't have seen some of the other videos I've produced following my garden through the year, through spring, summer, autumn, and even patio pots and displays for winter colour. So check out the videos on my gardening channel. If you're a regular viewer, then welcome back. And in this video, I'm going to cover some of the things I've been up to in my garden to get the garden through autumn, prepared for winter, and also some plans for spring. And as the gardening year does come to an end, these wonderful displays of bloom will gradually fade. The hydrangeas have already finished, the flower heads have turned brown. I'm going to leave those in place to provide some protection over the winter, to stop the frost getting in and killing the new buds there, which will produce growth and flowers next year. I've got some Acidanthera, this beautiful Gladiolus calicanthus in flower now. So if you're looking for something to provide some late colour in your garden, plant up some pots with these little corms. You plant them earlier in the year, they'll grow up through the summer and give you a beautiful late flowering display. But I'm going to try and keep the other things like the fuchsias and the summer bedding going for as long as possible to provide colour right up until the end of autumn. And then some of these plants, like this little fuchsia, will be brought under cover into my greenhouse to provide some winter protection. But there are lots of things still in flower. The dahlias are looking spectacular still. These will keep going right up until the first frost. This variety was called Pink Princess. And then I've got the Bishop of York with his darker coloured leaf and beautiful orangey gold flowers on this side. And of course, the perennial sunflower, flowering through from late summer through autumn. This variety called Lemon Queen, giving you these beautiful, simple golden flowers to take the colour through into the autumn season. And not only do I enjoy this display, bees and beneficial insects have been feeding on these flowers, and it's lovely seeing some late flowers still provide the pollen and nectar that those beneficial insects and bees enjoy. But of course, planning for colour right the way through the year means buying and growing the right plants. I've got a lovely variegated grass. This is a Miscanthus called Golden Breeze, growing in a pot, which gives you this beautiful foliage display right the way through summer and through into autumn. I've also got pots of hostas to provide colour and interest. Hostas, I think, are a great hardy perennial to grow in patio pots, and you'll find a video on growing these on my channel at Adam's Gardening Guides. And a pot like this with a centerpiece of a variegated yucca surrounded by beautiful fragrant nemesia. This variety called Wisley Vanilla has got the most wonderful fragrance to it, and if I'm lucky I'll enjoy this flowering display of the nemesia through autumn. Then I'll cut the plants back and they might just get through the winter in my unheated greenhouse and grow back to put on a display next year. But for now, sit back and relax. In this video I'm going to cover the autumn gardening period, taking you through autumn and some of the activities I've been up to in my own garden. Things to prune, things to plant, patio pots which will keep the colour coming through autumn, and pots of bulbs to plant up for the spring. So sit back and relax and enjoy my autumn gardening guide. Autumn is in the air, and it's time to enjoy fresh seasonal new flowers that will brighten up the garden until the cold weather and frost bring the season to an end. The fading shades of summer are everywhere, and fiery tones of ever-changing foliage provide a backdrop to the displays until they finally fall to carpet the borders and provide valuable material to collect and compost, turning it into lovely leaf mould. Autumn is also the season of plenty, bringing in the harvest, picking crisp juicy fruits from trees and turning the soil to reveal those hidden crops that have been developing unseen all summer. Autumn may be bringing one gardening year to an end, but there are plenty of jobs to keep you busy preparing for winter and planning and planting for the new gardening year ahead. Autumn is when those late flowering hardy perennials really come into their own, like spreading clumps of aster monch, with its simple daisy-like sky blue flowers produced in profusion, each with a golden centre. Japanese anemones come into their own with different varieties in different colours, and these hardy plants will get established to form large clumps that create impressive seasonal displays and keep the bees happy too. Rudbeckia or coneflower are another popular autumn flower, with reliable favourites like Goldsturm being joined by others like Henry Eilers. And the new ones like Summerina Orange. How's this for a fiery display? For many, this really is the true colour of autumn. I know you have to make space for these autumn bloomers and ignore the fact that they've just been developing as leafy clumps through the summer months while their summer flowering neighbours have been flaring their hearts out. But isn't the wait worthwhile? Now those summer flowers have faded, it's time for these stars of the autumn garden to shine. And aren't they glorious? There are bulbs like colchicum that I plant at the front of my border so their flowers develop just beneath the leaves of a dwarf golden cornus. And they're hardy and they come back every year. So this is one show of blooms I always look forward to. But for something a bit more subdued, there are always heathers. I can't say they really rock my boat, but if they do yours, then take a look at these, the Bud Blooming Garden Girls series of Calluna vulgaris, ideal for a long and colourful autumn show. There are flowers to enjoy everywhere, and of course the insects love them too. The dahlias just keep on flowering and flowering and will continue right up until a harsh frost brings their display to an end. So in mild areas they can keep going well through October and even into November if you're really lucky. Bulb planting time is upon us too, and you'll find very enticing displays of pre-packed spring flowering bulbs in garden centres now, or check online for mail order suppliers, especially if you want something new or a little bit different. I like to plant a few alliums or flowering onions in pots. Varieties with the largest flowers often have the largest bulbs too, like Gladiator. And next spring or summer I can plant these out in the garden where I see a space and enjoy their magnificent globes of flowers. I find planting them through lower growing perennials best, so they surge up to add a higher layer of colour above a carpet below. Tulips can be planted at any time up until the end of the year, but buy the bulbs soon as popular varieties always sell out. One of my favourites is the multi-headed tulip Antoinette, sometimes called the chameleon tulip, as its flowers change colour as they age. And you can find a video about this spectacular tulip on my channel at Adam's Gardening Guides, so do take a look. And later in this video I'll show you step by step how to plant daffodils in a lovely terracotta patio pot for a spring display. It's easy to do and one autumn job I always enjoy. As well as flowers, there are crops to harvest. Potatoes to lift and store, tomatoes to pick like the impressive blight-resistant Mountain Magic, pears swelling up and ready to pick so you can bring them indoors to ripen up and eat over the coming months, and greenhouse crops coming to an end like the final pickings from my cucumber Carmen. It's always a pleasure sharing my hints, tips, ideas and advice with everyone. So please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button right away and subscribe to my gardening channel. There's plenty more videos on my channel for you to enjoy too. Autumn is not only harvest time for me, but for wildlife too, and my local squirrels are busy collecting acorns from a neighbour's oak tree and burying them around my garden. They're darting about everywhere looking for places to bury their food, but quite how they remember where they've put them I'll never know. And while the squirrel is busy digging holes and burying nuts on my lawn during the day, look who I caught on camera wandering across my lawn at night. Now I wonder what he's up to. I mentioned bees earlier, and I do enjoy sharing my garden with local wildlife too. I've come across frogs hiding among the leaves on my strawberries. So despite not having a pond myself, these helpful slug eaters find their way into my garden from neighbours. But I do try to provide them with somewhere to shelter by building small log piles, well, piles of sticks really, alongside my veg plot and at the back of my flower borders, creating protected habitats for frogs, beetles and other creatures to crawl into to shelter. I love attracting birds into my garden, both with the natural berries they can feed on and attracting them to the bird feeders so I can watch them enjoying the food that I've put out. But while my aim is to create a wildlife friendly garden to attract birds, some people introduce their own feathered friends. I was amused to find a flock of beautiful chickens pecking over the lawn of one autumn garden I visited called Cotton Manor Garden in Northampton. Aren't they beautiful and having great fun? Hopefully controlling some garden pests and providing delicious free-range eggs too. And as the garden has its own ponds, of course it has its own flamingos. What manor house worth its salt wouldn't? And it does have a beautiful garden to enjoy too, that looks good at any time of year. I've never kept chickens or flamingos. My garden birds are strictly of the wild variety. I do try to entice them in by putting out food and have several bird feeders positioned close to the house with a lovely clear view from a large picture window, so we can sit comfortably indoors in the warm and watch the birds without disturbing them. And once the birds were comfortable feeding from these feeders, I've started attaching a clear feeder to the window to bring the birds in even closer. You have to sit very still so as not to spook them, but it's lovely enjoying these wild birds up close and personal. But once you do put out bird food, everyone wants a piece of the action. Starlings will visit en masse and quickly eat every scrap of food from the feeder. What a mob! And as food supplies get scarce, even the squirrels will come closer to see what's on offer and take advantage of this free supply you have so generously provided. But I was surprised to see that my feeder wasn't just attracting birds. How did he get up here? Yes, mice are amazing climbers and will not only clear up fallen grain under your feeders, but climb up too to get a tasty takeaway. And if you're looking for advice on feeding your garden birds, then check out this video I've made on my channel for more tips and ideas. If your garden lacks the colour and impact you'd like, then why not add some extra plants to put on a seasonal show? Here in my flower border, I wanted to do just that. The sedum and the hardy geraniums along the front of the border were fine and could be left in place, but across the centre of the bed I've removed some rather spreading and invasive clumps of perennials that had grown too tall, and this made space for a new trio that would keep the colour coming. These include a centrally positioned Rudbeckia Goldsturm with golden flowers, and to the right a group of Japanese anemones called Fantasy Red Riding Hood, grouping 3 plants together for more impact, and to the left a group of Echinacea, a variety called Sensation Pink. So I started by just roughly positioning and tweaking the position of the plants just to make sure I was happy with how everything would look together. With their positions established, I dug over the site well to break up the soil, and I mixed in a generous quantity of organic material as well. This could be homemade compost, or you can buy bags of composted farmyard manure, or check out for offers on peat-free compost and sprinkle this over the area. digging it in deeply to thoroughly mix it in to break up any lumps. Digging helps improve drainage, particularly on heavy soil. It adds organic matter as well, and this locks in moisture and it feeds the worms and soil organisms, breaking down over time to form humus and release nutrients too. Then you're ready for planting, starting with this lovely red Japanese anemone, taking out a planting hole and popping in the root ball before pushing back the soil around it, firming it down well to remove any air pockets, then finishing by spreading a layer of compost over the soil surface around it as a mulch. Plants can be positioned about 12 to 18 inches apart in this group of 3 anemones. And when you're planting, you can gently settle the soil down around each root ball with your shoe if you want. You don't need to push down too heavily, but just want to make sure that the soil has settled down around the root ball and is in close contact with it. Again, spread more compost over the soil surface around the plants as a finishing touch. Move along the bed now to the Rudbeckia, and if you slide off the pot and you find that the root ball is very congested, you can just loosen some of the roots over the surface, teasing them away gently. This can sometimes help the roots grow out from the root ball into the surrounding soil rather than just continue in a spiral inwards. After all, what you want is for each plant to send out its roots into the surrounding soil so it gets established and better able to support itself. Then finish by spreading more compost over the soil around it and water in thoroughly. Then give everything a thorough watering. I always ensure potted plants are well watered before I start planting. Then once you've planted, watering helps to settle the soil down around the root ball of each plant, moistening the surrounding soil so that the roots can start growing out from these root balls into the soil around. Further watering will be needed over the coming weeks until the plants are well rooted and established. So gauge how wet the weather is. If it rains thoroughly, then you can probably leave alone, but if conditions are dry, then you must water thoroughly. And of course, these hardy perennials will die back as we move through winter, and their tops can be pruned down. Then they'll send up new shoots in the spring, grow taller through summer, and flower again next autumn. I do hope you're enjoying this video, and if you are, you might want to check out another topical video I've got on my channel called Pick the Best Plants for Autumn and Winter Colour. It's got lots of suggestions for choosing and growing plants to provide autumn and winter colour, including planting up beautiful patio pots that provide interest through the cold months of winter. I grow lots of things in pots on my patio, and you want to keep the summer displays going for as long as possible, well into autumn, to keep the things flowering. And things like this lovely Nemesia, I think this is Lady Emma, just keep them watered. Even when it rains, sometimes you need to water your patio pots. Osteospermum, I've kept well deadheaded. It's got more flushes of blooms coming along. Other things I've got in pots like the bloodgrass imperata and the hostas there. Keep them watered, fill up the little saucers underneath them with water so that they've got plenty of moisture to take up and keep growth strong and healthy. The lovely structural grasses like this striped leafed Miscanthus look great in patio pots right through the year, but particularly now in autumn they're at their very tallest, producing a really impressive display. The pineapple flowers, this is Eucomis bicolour, just coming to an end, but the seed heads forming nicely on that. The cordyline Torbay dazzler got killed off last winter, died right the way back to the base, but this new growth coming up is really rejuvenated the pot. Hydrangeas at this time of year also can start looking magnificent. The white flowered Madame Emile Moulier looking gorgeous at the moment, shining out in the sunshine today. Another lovely pineapple flower, Eucomis, and keeping the displays going well into autumn. We've got the Dahlias. This one is Bishop of York. Lovely single flowers. Hoverfly enjoy feeding on those, eating the pollen and the nectar. And this will keep on flowering, keep deadheading. You'll get further flushes of flower right up to the frost. And then I'll leave this Dahlia in its pot for the winter. I'll just stop watering, move the pot to my unheated greenhouse, and let the Dahlia die down naturally. And hopefully that will come back again next year to put on another display. The begonias in hanging baskets have looked glorious this summer, but you do need to go on providing them with attention until the frosts finally bring the display to an end. And deadheading is one of those things just to do every few days. Just go over the plants, and if you find any faded blooms, you can just sort of pick those off. Just snap those off earlier, further down into the plant itself. Just remove any old petals and things you see, just to keep the display looking its best. You might also see the seed heads developing on them, so these can be picked off too. So just go over the plants, pick off anything that fades, and leave these other flowers to develop. And of course, in addition to deadheading, watering. Just baskets will need water. You can usually tell just by lifting the basket at the base, see how heavy it is, but just make sure you give it plenty of water to keep this display going. I won't need to feed because I mix some slow release fertilizer into the compost at planting time, but just give them a really good drench of water every few days. Water will overflow and drip down. I've got a fern down below actually to catch the water, and once it's had a really good soaking, then I can go on and water the rest of the bedding plants in pots. I'm always looking for flowers in my garden which are hardy and perform really well, and this hardy perennial is a variety of the perennial sunflower family. It's Helianthus. This is called Lemon Queen, that starts flowering through August well into September and produces a succession of these beautiful golden daisy shaped flowers. They open flower after flower after flower, giving you weeks of beautiful performance. And it starts flowering, as I say, in around about August time. It will grow in good conditions to about 5, maybe even 6 foot in height. It spreads as a clump to fill your borders, so it's a great plant to put towards the back of the flowering displays in your borders. Or here in my garden, I've got a corner spot. I need a little bit of height and impact, and it grows really well. In the winter, it just dies down to ground level, grows up in the spring, puts on a lovely thicket of growth through the summer months, and as we move through August, the first flowers will start to open. And being a lovely single open flower, it brings in the bees. The bees adore feeding from the flowers, so you'll find it's alive through these late summer months into autumn, keeping the bees happy. And it also feeds hoverflies that can feed from their single flowers. The hoverfly adult will be feeding on the pollen and nectar in these blooms, and it will produce, as I say, many weeks of superb flowering performance and come back year after year. The Clematis viticella Etoile rose has been flowering for weeks now, produces these lovely little nodding heads of pink flowers with a deeper pink band down the centre of each petal. And as the flowers fade, you'll be left with these really charming, sort of fluffy seed heads to enjoy over the coming weeks. And I've just let this Clematis scramble up into the holly hedge alongside. Clematis viticella will die back in the winter and I cut it right off at soil level and I let it grow up through the season, scrambling over holly hedge on one side and this nice lace cap hydrangea on the other. This is looking gorgeous now. The hoverflies still feeding from these flowers, enjoying the nectar and pollen. And if you've got hoverflies feeding on your flowers, you know that they'll be breeding and laying eggs, and the larvae of the hoverfly will be feeding on your greenfly and aphid pests. So certainly worth having these in the garden. Hydrangeas are a lovely flower just to take summer into autumn, and even once the flowers start fading, they've still got a charm of their own. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you do, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, Adam's Gardening Guides on YouTube. I've got dozens more videos on my channel which I hope you'll enjoy too, so check those out. Thank you. I'm a great fan of hardy perennials which come up year after year, and one really reliable variety I've planted in the border here just underneath the shade of this Viburnum Mauricii is one of my favourites. This is Rudbeckia Goldsturm. Really reliable plant, really doesn't need to be divided that often, probably every 3 or 4 years at the most. And as we move through July into August and certainly into September, you'll be getting the flowers developing, these beautiful golden daisy shaped flowers which last for many, many weeks, puts on a great show and shines out, I think, like a beacon in a slightly dappled shade position, adding a touch of gold to your borders. So if you want something really cheerful to brighten up your September garden, check out the Rudbeckias, and especially this lovely variety, Rudbeckia Goldsturm. And over my pergola arch, dividing the top from the bottom of the garden, I've trained the golden hop, which is now producing some nice little hops. Leaves aren't quite as golden as the new growth is. Goes over on the other side of the arch. Got this lovely golden leafed jasmine, Fiona Sunrise, which loses its leaves in the winter and puts on a lovely display of golden foliage through the year. Little white summer jasmine flowers as well. This is mixed in here. We've got some hops being produced here, and also the seed heads of the honeysuckle. I've got a honeysuckle just twining in amongst the other climbers up this arch with the golden jasmine and also a wisteria. And once the flowers of a honeysuckle are finished, produces these lovely berries which will continue just adding some extra colour and interest to this display well into the autumn months. It's nice to boost your patio displays with seasonal bedding plants. I've had the Nemesia around the yucca, giving me colour through the summer. Now we're moving into autumn. I'm going to plant up some of my pots with some autumn chrysanthemums. I've bought some little pots of this one. It's just called Chrysanthemum Purple, so it doesn't really have a named variety. I'm going to plant them into this container, and these will give you flowers for many more weeks as you move through September into October. Some flowers opening, lots of buds to come, so you'll get probably 7 or 8 weeks of flower colour out of these chrysanthemums. Now I've lined the inside of this terracotta pot with some bits of old compost bag just to stop the pot losing so much moisture. Fill it with a layer. I'm using a peat-free compost today. Put a layer of compost in there. Then what I tend to do is to get each of these plants and get the empty pots and use these as a template for planting up the pot itself. So I just put those down there. Just get your little pots in. Third one here. And now I will fill in around these with compost. Just firming the compost around the empty pots. I'm positioning these so they're just below the rim of the pot. So actually the compost will be a centimetre or 2 below the rim of the terracotta pot, and I've finished. I'm just going to go on filling in around this with compost. Push it down firmly because you want it to stay in place when you remove these plastic pots. Then once you've got a decent amount of compost in, firm it down well and just ease each of these pots out to leave the indentation of the pot itself. Then all you've got to do is take your individual plants and root balls, and these will just drop down into the indentations that you've created. Here we go. Last one in there. And now I can just fill in around with a little bit more compost, and finally water in to settle the compost around the root ball of little chrysanthemum plants that we've put in. Just water from above and let the water trickle down. And then what I do through the summer, and I will do this through the autumn as well, particularly with things in terracotta pots, is I will leave a saucer underneath the pot filled with water. So on hot days there's a reservoir of moisture in the base. I think for plants like this I'd probably leave the saucer there until the end of the year, but if you find that the rainy weather is coming, you could remove the saucer. But to be honest, the reservoir's only got a couple of centimetres of water in, so the compost isn't going to get waterlogged. That just provides that extra reservoir of moisture to keep growth going and keep the plants happy while they're in flower. I love my duo of Alstroemeria. I've got two dwarf varieties in small pots. These are varieties of Alstroemeria Inticantia, and I started a few years ago with this lovely pink variety called Sunshine, which the bees adore feeding from too. And last year I got a companion for it. This is Alstroemeria Havana. Both very dwarf compact varieties, and as you can see, if I step back a little bit here, they're in small pots, about 10-12 inch pots, and they only grow to about 10 or 12 inches in height themselves. And talk about long lasting flower power. These are superb varieties. They are hardy. I leave them in pots all year round. They can be divided and repotted probably every other year. The new growth comes up in the spring. I actually put these pots in my greenhouse to give them some protection from winter wet, but they don't need warmth over winter. And the new growth starts in the spring, and I bring the pots outside and put them on the patio probably around about June time, and I'll get a succession of flowers through June, July, August, September, now into September, and these should go on producing more flushes of flower well into the autumn. I'd certainly expect to be enjoying some flowers later in October and even November. And Alstroemerias are very easy to look after. The new flower stems grow up from the base. When flowers have finished, as they have here, this flower spike has finished flowering, you literally grasp the stem at the base and give it a tug. It's a firm tug. There, up it comes, and you just pull the whole thing away from the base. And where that's broken away from the base, you'll actually get some new flower spikes developing. Over here on this pot of Sunshine, again, I've got a couple of flower spikes have finished, so literally grab the spike and give it a whoop. It's just pulled away. Just pull it away right from the base. Pull it away, pull it up completely. Sharp tug, pull it up. And that's the best way. Don't cut them off, or the base of that stem can rot in the soil. Just give them a little bit of a tug, and then you'll be getting new flushes of flowers developing over the coming weeks. Regularly deadheading roses encourages further flushes of flowers to develop as we move through the year. So just clip over these to remove any faded flowers, keeps the displays looking tidy. And deadheading, as I say, is a really good way of making sure that new shoots will be developed from further down the stem to carry flushes of flowers right the way through into autumn. Whenever you've got a faded flower stem like this, follow it down to a pair of leaves lower down, snip away just any faded flowers, follow the stem back, prune just above the leaf, keep the plants looking neat and tidy, and hopefully you'll encourage further flushes of flower later in the year. I do try and plant flowers in my garden to give me blooms right the way through the year, particularly for feeding the bees. The sedum varieties are coming into flower as we move through late summer into autumn, and the bees really adore feeding on those. So when you're planning your garden flowers and planting, nice to have the foliage and the structure, but also try and have something in flower for as many months of the year as possible, particularly with bees in mind. Now September, October, even into November, good times for planting daffodils, and later in the year tulips as well. And I fill deep pots with a good multi-purpose compost. Fill them about good half, 2/3 full, and then spread the bulbs out over the surface of the compost. Be generous, plant plenty in a pot, so bigger pots, more compost, more bulbs. Space the bulbs out, so not actually touching, but a good layer of bulbs. Cover with more compost, water well. Put the pots somewhere sheltered to develop over the winter time. Somewhere I put mine at the back of the arch, and then by March, April time, the bulbs will come into full flower. You can enjoy a wonderful spring flowering display. Lilies have been a real favourite of mine on the summer patio. And now we're moving into autumn, you'll notice that on some varieties, at the top of the stems, you'll get these little bulbs starting to form around the leaves. Tiny little nodules, and these can be propagated and grown on to form new lily bulbs. They'll take several years to grow up to flowering size. If you just look at the tops of the stems of this variety of Lineum leichtlinii, there's the leaf stalk, and in just the node in between the leaf and the stem are these tiny little dark, almost black bulbils. Sometimes they'll fall off onto the ground on their own, but really if you can pick these off, just tease them off once they're about the size of a pea, pick them off, and you can pot these up individually either into seed trays or little modules, grow them on, they will root. You can grow them on over the next few years and they'll reach fully sized lily bulbs to give you more flowers. Before I describe some of the plant combination recipes I've developed in my patio pots over the last few years, there's just one more group of flowering plants I must mention, and that's pansies and violas. These bedding plants are great value when you're gardening on a budget, and they have a wonderful repeat flowering habit, producing new flowers continually through autumn, winter and into spring. They come in such a wide range of colours and mixtures, there's certain to be one that takes your fancy, and their happy little faces are certain to bring a smile to your face during winter too. To keep pansies and violas blooming, just snip off the faded flowers, as they have a habit of forming little seed heads, which you don't want. Keep pots watered when conditions are dry, which they often can be through the winter and spring, and be on the lookout for green fly pests, especially on the underside of leaves, treating the plants with an organic spray if necessary. For one of my autumn winter pot arrangements, I've chosen a cheery yellow viola that will shine out on dull days. To get started, I've chosen a large patio pot. This will hold a greater variety and number of plants than a small pot to create a much more impressive display. My pot is made of terracotta, which is porous. It's a breathable material. So to keep the compost moister for longer, I line the inside with pieces of plastic cut from old compost bags. Then I fill with a good quality multi-purpose compost, and prefer using a peat-free compost if I can find one, to which I add some slow release fertiliser granules mixed well into the compost. Now for the plants. First things first, water everything well before planting. To add height with its beautifully variegated foliage, I'm a great fan of a spurge called Euphorbia Ascot Rainbow, which has a greyish green leaf with an irregular golden edge. And these take on a pink tinge during cold winter weather. It's the leaves that add interest through the winter, but heads of flower develop at the tips of each stem through spring into early summer. For my second plant, I've chosen an evergreen shrub called Skimmia. You'll find lots of suitable varieties for growing in pots, and I'll cover some of these later, but I like Skimmia rubella. This is a male form with deep green leaves and flowers at the tips of each shoot that have a deep pink bud through the winter time. For some colourful berries, I've chosen Panettia mucronata, the prickly heath. You'll sometimes find this sold as Gaultheria mucronata, which is exactly the same thing. Check the surface of the pot for weeds, moss or other unwanted growth and pick this off before planting. Bittercress is one weed you'll often find on new plant purchases, so pick it off rather than allow it to develop and spread around your garden. If it has some really good clusters of berries, then place these close to the edge of the pot so that they just hang over the side. As before, I fill in around the root ball of the shrub with a little compost as I plant, pushing it down firmly with my fingertips to remove any air pockets and adjusting its position and level. And for the finishing touch, I recommend violas, repeat flowering bedding plants that bloom successionally until spring. Plant generously to fill in around the shrubs and completely cover the compost. Bright yellow violas look really cheerful during the cold, dull days of winter, and they match the golden stripe in the leaf of Euphorbia Ascot Rainbow, as well as contrasting nicely with the pink berries of the Panettia and the lovely red blooms of Skimmia rubella. Just water well after planting to settle the compost in around the root balls of the shrubs and bedding. Then check weekly to ensure the compost remains moist and doesn't dry out completely. Back to Skimmia for a moment. The Skimmia rubella I planted in this arrangement is a male form of Skimmia, and you'll find some Skimmia are male, some are female, and some are both. Skimmia Q Green is another popular male form with glossy green evergreen leaves and large green flower heads through winter that open into white flowers in late spring. These flowers are sometimes called terminal panicles, which describes their form. Skimmia Finchii has white flowers and plain green leaves, but for variegated foliage, look for the much dwarfer Skimmia Magic Marlow, with a creamy edge to its leaves and red winter flower buds bursting open into fragrant white flowers in spring. Or there is a slightly more vigorous variegated form called Skimmia parosa. If you've got any camellias in your garden, remember to keep up the watering through autumn. Really give them a good soak to make sure they never go short of water, particularly any camellias growing in pots. The thing is, at this time of year, the camellia is starting to form its flowers. The little flower buds are developing at the tips of all the shoots. And if the camellia goes short of moisture during the autumn months, August through September, October, November, if you go short of moisture, then the buds don't develop properly and they can fall off before the flowers fully open next spring. So make sure you keep camellias really well watered, particularly when the weather is dry. I just had some calendulas which I've sown here. Bees enjoying feeding on these today. I've just sown this little row of calendulas alongside my lettuces and salads and other crops here, but the bees really love feeding on the flowers. The hoverflies will come in too. That companion planting is a great way of controlling pests around the garden. But if you've got some flowers in here, then you're going to be getting the bees and the beneficial insects coming in. So always try and find space to put a few flowers in amongst the crops. The companion planted calendulas or pot marigolds around the kitchen garden provide some lovely flowers for the beneficial insects to come in, but I let let them seed as well. You can deadhead regularly, picking off these deadheads to stop them forming seeds and keep the flowers going, but it's certainly worth leaving some to set seed later in the season, because I can collect these seeds and sow some new marigolds next year from the seeds that I've sown. Thanks for joining me in my garden. Hopefully it's just shown you what I've been up to and given you a few ideas for your own gardens, perhaps some things to put into action next year and keep the colour going right the way through into autumn in your own garden. Whatever you're up to, happy gardening.